It's a pleasure to be here in Jena, the city of optics, which is a topic that I've spent my life on studying vision in people who are visually impaired, how to improve their vision. So in a way, Jena is an eye-opener 1.0, and my past research in vision restoration is an eye-opener 2.0. But I'm not here to talk about that, but I talk about the eye-opener 3.0, which is the problem of fake publications in science. And the development is quite concerning. You kindly introduced some of the work I've been doing in the past and that I currently am involved in. And it is an issue that we cannot ignore, and we should wake up to what I think is not exaggerated to be the largest science crisis of all time. Because with hundreds of thousands of fake publications in the literature, we cannot be sure anymore when we read a paper whether it's real or fake. And especially since artificial intelligence is conquering our lives, the problem is even worse because the quality is so high that no way you will detect this. Yeah, they are far beyond our imagination, what can be done and how well fake can be produced. But we need to raise awareness. This is why I feel like I have a mission to open your eyes to this problem. So when you do your work, you check carefully of what you base your decisions on. It is a threat to all areas of our life. Certainly in biomedicine, you can easily imagine if a wrong decision is made when it comes to diagnostics or using a drug or some other method, that if the drug's not working or it does the opposite of what it should, we should be concerned. And closing our eyes is not going to help us. And opening our eyes and understanding that we really have to take care of this problem in one way or another is what I am trying to argue for. Now, when I was a young student and studying in a red lab, and then working hard, sweating, working overnight, analyzing the experiments, doing the statistics, trying to figure out what does it all mean. And at the end, you get a paper that is published. How does it feel? It feels like almost like a personal piece of art, right? It's your individual creation. You can be proud of it, and hopefully people will read it and maybe even cite it. And that feels really cool. And even if you have written hundreds of papers, your whole career, like me, I'm still proud to have a new understanding of something. And that's why I got into science, because I was curious. I was curious to find out something new that wasn't known before. But if the fake literature enters the permanent scientific record, it almost feels like the magic is gone. It feels like junk. I'm part of junk. I'm exaggerating the case now. But it's different. And it will harm science not only for making the wrong decisions, but for wasting money, wasting even our own emotions or motivations, not being sure of what we read is actually true. And this is why I want to give this lecture, so to help you wake up and understand this is not a theoretical issue. We are right in the middle of the crisis, but hardly anybody has noticed, at least not for the last year, before the last 1 or 2 years. So now fraud in science is nothing new, and there are many, let's see, how do you advance this? There are many cases, and I only show you one case. Yes. Okay. All right, here we go. But even in flagship journals, publications are caught for having been faked. And it even hits people who are quite well known. Like this case of Eslaya Meslaya, who is or was a prominent neuroscientist and a top official at the National Institute of Aging in the United States. And he controlled a budget of 2.3 billion US dollars to advance the field of Alzheimer's research. He was actually later caught for faking 132 publications with fake images that were just copied and pasted into his publications to support his research. Well, he didn't have the job much longer, as you can easily imagine, and it isn't the only case. There's also a case here in Germany, in Potsdam, near Berlin. There was recently a retraction from Nature, where scientists who studied the cost of the climate change, completely exaggerated the cost, which was fabricated, maybe to advance the motivation, increase the motivation of people to fight it. So it's quite easy for so-called paper mills, who are professional agencies that create fake publications after you send them the check. So as a scientist, you just send in a check and you get a paper published with some authors of your choice. And to show you how this works, I want to show you this video, the sound of which I hope will work. And this was in the German TV channel Hessischer Rundfunk some time ago.
This is Jan Eggers. He is faking a scientific article. No, he is not a forger, not a criminal, but an AI expert from Hessian Broadcasting. He is supposed to show us how it works. What a fake.
Now I copy my fabricated data here and say, start writing this article. And then I get the table of contents for 2021 as the first. And next comes the summary, the abstract, which describes what the study is about.
A scientific article by an AI, and everything is completely fabricated.
I thought I would choose an animal that makes it relatively clear that it cannot exist. And then I came up with the chupacabra. This is a mythical creature that supposedly roams the Andes of South America and attacks sheep, among other animals and goats. But that doesn't exist with Jan Eggers.
Already now. How that works. More on that later. Our AI expert, Bernhard Sabel, has never written a scientific article himself. However, he is quite proficient in the application of AI.
The first thing you need is credible data. So I had the AI generate, be an engineer who assembles such synthetic test data. Then I described to the AI how it should look, and now I will fit it. And then the AI starts by considering what kind of data it needs to generate for me, and then it even writes a small computer program that randomly generates this data.
The fictional data shows the analysis of camera trap images, including how many chupacabras are visible and what they have eaten. Jan inputs the data into ChatGPT and instructs the AI to work like a scientist with it.
1,000. Then I showed her that these are data from papers from studies that actually exist, and I have included that as an example. And now I will copy my invented data here and say, go ahead and start writing this article.
It only takes a few seconds, and what is written there sounds quite scientific.
The study provides meaningful data that allows for the accurate definition of the activity times, social structures, and feeding habits of the chupacabra. I find dietary habits fascinating because I would have never thought of that. And I learned that chupacabras have a variable prey spectrum. In other words, they eat everything in a jumble. Now, from the first attempts to what we see here, maybe it takes about 2 hours of work. And once you get a bit familiar with it, and perhaps do it more often and have everything prepared, I think a few hours would be enough to create a really convincing looking paper.
At first glance, everything is already included, even images of the fake camera traps with chupacabras and their prey. And in presentations, one could even show a short video of the mythical creature.
Funny, yes, but also creepy because our concept of what we consider real is being massively challenged. You can see it's really very, very simple. I didn't use anything that would require a longer study or deeper knowledge, and everything is so readily available on the market.
It's high time for a change in science. Quality over quantity. More independent control and intelligent tools to detect fake articles than even the paper mills can pack up.
Now, this was 2024. Now we're a few years ahead in the AI game. And you can imagine that if it takes 2 hours to create this, not being a scientist, how easy it is to create a publication at the push of the button. And I would estimate it probably takes less than a minute. Because all you have to do, if you have to put in the keywords, I want something to be written on blah, 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 this and this, find me the right papers and the references, please write the review, write the experimental protocol and give me the results. And of course, if you have some data that you can sort of steal or modify from somebody else, makes it even easier and perhaps even less difficult to detect. Now, this is a big business that makes the paper mills rich. Paper mills are these agencies that produce these publications by the hundreds of thousands each year. And depending on what kind of article you are ordering, does it include experiments? Yeah, of course, created, invented data, or is it just submitting, or are you successful, or can you guarantee that it will be in a high impact factor journal? That increases the price, and you can pay sometimes even as much as you pay for publication fees to Nature. So if you get into Nature, they'll give you tens of thousands of euros for that, but you have to pay them tens of thousands of euros for that. Yeah. So it is a profitable business, which is sort of the honey that the paper mills put out there. So for us, the bees to fly there and try to get the honey, that is reputation by citation and by number of publications, which is in a way the pull factor. We are pulling or do everything to increase the reputation, which is legitimate. Everybody needs a reputation in science, but the measures and metrics which are used are certainly a driver that sustains a reputation economy. It makes the paper mills rich, and also especially the commercial publishers. Now, if you ask the question, well, how much money is involved here? And our very conservative estimate of data that we analyzed in 22, now it's a few years later, the number is probably outdated, it's much higher now, is in biomedicine alone, we are sure it's at least 100,000. If you use a red flag method, that is a best estimate, it could be 3 times that much in 22. So now in biomedicine, we could probably reach about 400,000 by now. And if you multiply that by 2 or 3 for all scientific fields, we're dealing with a flood of fake in the literature. And the paper mills revenue is in the order of billions. 3 billion is probably a conservative low estimate, but indirectly also the publishers, they benefit from the APCs, the production charge of academic articles. That is the page charge or the publication charge you need to pay. They benefit from it indirectly. I'm not saying that they're promoting it, but they are benefiting as well, just as a matter of fact, which isn't surprising. Now, when you study where this flood of fake papers come from, there is quite a difference between the countries throughout the world. This is a figure that results from an analysis of our 22 study, and it shows that there are basically 3 camps, so to speak. Countries that have a very high rate of articles that need to be red flagged, like Russia, Turkey, China, Egypt, India. You can see that they're in the order of almost 50%, according to our estimate. It may be, of course, it varies a lot between institutions, but this is just an overall a rough estimate. Meantime, China has adapted somehow to it. Either they tried to clean the mess or they tried to hide it better, I can't tell. But India is now leading the fake production. But then there is a mid-level sort of set of countries which are listed here: Brazil, Taiwan, Mexico, Serbia, Iran, and so forth. And interestingly, the so-called Western countries, and I include Japan in that sort of the traditional scientific countries, here the rate is much lower. So while we also contribute to the mess, we are not the main producer of it, but we are the ones, when citing papers and making decisions, we're damaged by it, no matter where it comes from. And the number of fake publications may also explain why there is some unnatural growth of publications, of all publications. Here you see a graph where I plot the growth rate of science publications in Germany, in the world, in the US, and you can see that the graph showing China, which is the solid line, it kind of was in the range of like here Germany, for example, or Japan, but at around 2002, you see how it grows steadily and even accelerates more up on the top. And my interpretation of a straight line, does anybody have an idea what that could indicate? If the line is pretty much straight, except for the bump around COVID, yeah, when initially they had less papers and then all of a sudden they had more. I think it is basically explainable by quota that you have to reach as an institution. So everybody is trying to finish by this 31st of December and get the paper and to fill the quota. But COVID came in the way, and then you kind of have a slight drop. But that's so basically the increase is steady every year until I tracked it here until 23. That is unnatural and can't be explained because the percentage change in most of the countries is somewhere between 200 to 400% in a 25-year period. For China, the growth is 3,200%, and for India, 1,100%. Now, paper mills promote their business also by bribing editors. I got an email one day, an unsolicited email, I didn't ask for it, of someone that wrote me an email: oh, we like your journal and we'd like to help you and we'd like to publish papers in your journal. You have such wonderful journal, blah, blah, blah. And we offer you $1,500 for a publication so that you publish it fast. They didn't say so you publish it, so that you publish it fast. Yeah? And I said, I have to talk to my publisher about it. So can we have a Zoom meeting so I learn more in how this is done and how we could collaborate? And and we had a quite open conversation. And with the permission of the other side, I was able to record what was being offered. And I only give you a little snip of a 1-hour conversation in the following video. Okay, how are we going to get the sound going here? I think I need some technical help. No, it doesn't. The video is not starting.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I understand your question. I think your question is, except our editing fee, except the formal publication fees, if your journal accept our articles and how much we can pay for you, right?
Mhm.
Okay, I think it's around $1,000 and $1,500. It's around this area.
Yeah, per impact factor, right? Multiplied by impact factor of the journal.
You said it's around 2, right?
No, yeah, we are around 2.
Yeah. So it's around this level.
Okay. The other question.
It's about the impact factor about 2. Okay, go ahead.
So if the impact factor would be 4, let's say if the journal becomes more and more successful with good manuscripts, then the fee would double then, right?
Yeah, you understand right. Yeah.
Okay, so
it depends on the impact factor.
Right, so if theoretically, if we had an impact factor of 10, that would be 10,000 USD, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I understand.
I agree. Yeah.
But I'm afraid we cannot make 10.
It's good future. I think if you can get an impact factor 10, I think we can pay you $10,000. No problem.
Okay,
that's okay. That's great.
No problem. $10,000. Now, if a small journal has 100 publications, you multiply it, you end up with $1 million as a side income. That's pretty attractive, right? Of course, this kind of mechanism ruins the system. Yeah, and we don't. Of course, I can't go around and ask editors, "Are you getting money from the paper mill?" Yeah, but I've heard of at least 35 cases that have been bribed. Another trick to boost the system is the citation rates. Of course, we like to be cited so that your personal Hirsch factor is going sky high, and this system also gets manipulated by the paper mills who try to boost your reputation by faking the Hirsch factor or the impact factor. We call it impact factor engineering. And I want to introduce you to Larry the cat. You see the cat here is on the right. That's the cat of the father of Fritz Richardson, who did the study. He did a bibliometric experiment as follows. He published 12 papers with the author of the cat's name, Larry. Larry the cat, the author. Yeah? And then he published 12 other papers that didn't have Larry as an author, but some other fictitious authors, also 12. And these 12 papers cited all the other 12 papers of Larry the cat. And so the cat actually succeeded in getting a Hirsch factor of 12. Yeah. So that means if you manipulate not only the number of publications, but also their citations, then it corrupts the system in our reputation economy, where we count only publications. Let's say in committee meetings, we have 150 applicants for a professorship position, let's say, right? So the bureaucratic convenience implies that if you look at the 150 applications, you can throw out at least 2/3 of them because they didn't reach a certain citation rate or something. You may have missed the real cool idea that was in that crowd and then hire somebody that is just cited a lot and published a lot. Of course, I'm very simplistic now. Of course, it's more complicated than this, but it has definitely an influence on careers. And that's why everybody is longing for being cited and having more and more publications. And that is actually not a very good idea, and a system that we have to reevaluate. Now, the two examples I showed you are only some examples of all the sins that the paper mills promote to increase their business. And I categorize this, I call it the blacklist of sins. into lying and into gaming the system. Lying includes article piracy. You just take some article and you change some data or change some molecules in it and publish the same thing again. You use false institutional emails that don't even exist. You copy or plagiarize images, text, data. You use nonsensical quotations. Let's say you study some material science and then there's something about psychology in there and you didn't pay attention. Sometimes I've even seen papers where the introduction of the paper starts the following. Thank you for your question. Now I write you what you were asking for. Hold on. Yeah? They even forgot to delete that sentence. Yeah? So it's automatized because nobody really looks at it. They just send it out. And gaming the system implies examples like bribing the editors or maybe publishers also riding the wave on hot topics, where a very popular topic for fake is cancer research, cardiovascular research, and also immunology. And in the COVID period, I think there were like something like 600,000 COVID papers or so. Like, how do you do a clinical study in those 2-3 years and get it all published? But it was, a cool thing to do to contribute, make yourself famous by publishing 20 papers on COVID in a month. Fictitious collaborations, and even maybe some of you may have seen it. I get emails every day about some junk. You probably get it all as well. But now even there are large publishers like Elsevier who is offering the service that they check your manuscript before you submit it. And for me, that is a continued education for paper mills. And it helps also the paper mills, because then if you say, well, this is plagiarized, you have to rewrite this so it passes the filter. I actually experienced myself at a conference in Geneva in 22. There was a guy from a publisher sitting at the booth, and I wasn't interested in the lecture, so I was roaming around the coffee place, and there was no traffic. And he looked bored, so I said, I walk up to him and I say, did you ever hear about fake publications? He goes, oh yeah, fake publications. Yeah, I heard about it. Yeah, yeah. So I say, is that a problem? Yeah, I think sometimes it's a problem. And I say, how do you know? He says, well, sometimes there are papers where the text was plagiarized, just copied. And I say, so what do you do? He says, well, I sent the paper back to the author and tell him to fix it. So the publisher actually recommends fixing the mistakes, whitewashing, if you will. And I'm not saying they're all doing that with all the journals, but this was one example where this is something that we really have to be concerned about, is also the whitewashing. Oh, it's all the problem's not so big. And yes, we have it under control. Quite concerning. This is why I also wrote this book. So I do have a conflict of interest. I forgot to mention in the beginning, because I do make a few euros if you buy this book. Now, if you use the conservative numbers of red flag papers, let's say they're around 16, I would say now even above 20, but let's say just to be conservative, 15, 16%, then you have the number of true fakes, at least 300,000 in the literature, the profitable business in the order of billions, Milliarden of Deutsch. What's more, all the lost experiments, the wrong decisions you made, the fact that you can't replicate something that, maybe you read 10 other people have already done it and you still can't replicate it, even you do it exactly the same way. You're wasting time, your own time, you're wasting the taxpayers' money, because all of this is paid by us, the taxpayers. We pay for the research. Hundreds of thousands of euros maybe per paper, depending on the field. We pay for the research. Then we pay to submit the paper for publication, the page charge, and then you have to pay again to read it. I think it's a great system, which is good for commercial publishers, especially because they make profits in the range of 30 to 40% of our taxpayers' money. I'm not saying all publishers are bad, don't get me wrong. There are lots also of small academic publishers, larger publishers that do an honest job and so on. But the big elephants, they make a lot of money, and I have nothing against making profit. In order for things to work, you gotta have to make profit, otherwise you go bankrupt. But does it have to be tens of thousands of euros for a Nature paper? Well, if we pay it, they say wonderful. Indirect damages, so calculated based on the figures above, we have wasted global R&D costs in the order of 2.5 trillion US dollars. If you take only almost 6% of it, you have a loss of 145 billion euros per year. If the figure is 3 times that much, then you can multiply this by 3. So you're at 500 billion loss of R&D just for not repeatable experiments, just experimentation itself. Never mind the indirect damage it does to us patients, to decisions in industry, which material to use, what experiment to do. All of that cannot really be counted. But the size of the problem is so huge that we've got to be concerned. And time to wake up and open your eyes. We're going to face the truth as it is and not sort of hide and say, well, it's going to go away and so on. So it has multiple secondary effects on us as a society. Of course, it's a profitable business, but it wastes human and financial resources. It can affect any area that we are looking at: health, technology, environment, economy, even security. It damages maybe even trust in science at some point, that our society say, wait a minute, scientists, and then they generalize to all of us, even though we may not do it. But it kind of affects our own reputation, and it harms authors that are honest and institutions that are honest, who do a good work and hard work to find new knowledge and new understanding. And of course, it will ruin the reputation of publishers that fake and also countries that fake. And they are waking up. In the last 2 years, they are waking up, especially after AI. The issue has become even worse because now it's so much easier to create a fake publication and difficult to identify because the quality is so high you would not notice. You will not notice this. So, since fake publications cite their own junk more in order to push the journals that they're supporting and the impact factors, logically, at the end of the day, if fake is more cited by fake, and then AI crawls, this fake stuff, the ratio of fake will get bigger and bigger, and you will end up with the knowledge collapse. The knowledge collapse is reached when 50% is fake and 50% is honest, and you don't know which is which. If this, or earlier, I'm always conservative. Yes. But if we don't do anything against this, I would say we have a knowledge collapse in 2 or 3 years, maximum. Because that's the cycle of how things get cited and how long it takes for it to be cited again and so forth. This is why we got together with a group of experts at the Royal Swedish Academy of Sciences, and the rest of the talk I want to briefly introduce that. You can read up on it in a publication and also on a website that is listed later. Here you see in the middle, the gentleman in the front, in the middle next to me. That is the Secretary General of the Royal Swedish Academy. And to his left, to his right, so from your point of view to the left, is Dan Larhammer, my collaborator. He and I work quite closely together for the last few years to organize this conference and then write the paper and the conclusions, designed the conclusions from what was discussed. He was the past president of that society. Now, we have 4 topics that we addressed. I will go over them just quickly because you can read it up on the website or also in the paper itself. The first issue is that academia should resume control over publishing again. we suggest the gradual conversion from commercial publishing to non-commercial, academically controlled publishing. You can imagine that the publishers don't like that. We had a discussion with the president of Springer Nature at a public meeting actually in January in Berlin. And of course they don't like it, but yeah, I mean, we now have to go into a discussion. So the academic community should again take control over it and not mainly the commercial interest. In fact, there is some movement now in the Leopoldina, the German Academy of Sciences, to push for diamond open access publishing, which we find to be the preferable model. That is, you don't have to pay to publish and you can read for free. Okay. And then at least the money incentive is then theoretically no longer available. And the responsibility to effect such changes are editors, libraries, scholarly academies, and any kind of scientific organization or the funders that support these organizations. The second system, I mentioned it already a little bit earlier, the incentive system to merit quality and not quantity. So make decisions when hiring people not only on impact factor and the number of publications, but after some screening, pick out the most attractive topics. I'll give you one example how this can be done is from the Charité. My friend Professor Diernagel, he explained this to me. They started the system when they hire professors by telling them, write 2 pages of what you have achieved. What is your unique point? Yeah. Then describe 2 pages. What is it you want to achieve with the new job? And list only 10 publications, no more. And don't list what journal it is. I think that is cool. Although administratively, of course, you would look, well, let's see what journal it is, maybe. But over time, let's say if we all agree on that, I think that would be the best methodology. And then you don't have to do any more salami slicing, like doing an experiment with 10 different subparts, and you write 10 papers, but write 1 paper and you describe all the experiments in an overall paper. So if, for example, as a postdoc, if you have a real cool series of experiments, in 3 years, if you write 1 paper that is really cool and convincing, that is better than if you write 3 or 4 papers, all of which are little slices. Yeah. But of course, that only works if the system has changed. So we are describing here the ideal world. The next topic, which is my favorite topic, is how to identify fraud. So to prevent it from happening and detecting all the junk in the literature. And for this, we suggest that there should be independent organizations that do the fraud checking and not the ones that are under control of publishers. It would be like that the automobile industry is certifying its own cars before they're allowed to drive on the street. This is done independently by an independent organization in Germany, it's the TÜV. Yeah? It gives a stamp, says this is safe. Or the Food and Drug Administration in the United States says this drug is safe and it is effective, so you get a stamp, you can sell it. So it has to be an independent organization, and the independence is the key issue here, not some subcontractor where they say, oh, we're doing all these checks, which is happening now. We're doing all these checks and we get rid of all this junk and before we publish it. And finally, of course, legislation and policies need to be drafted and recommended. This is a national issue, of course, but science is an international affair. So that's a bit more difficult because different national bodies have different legislative bases. So if we, I have a number of recommendations for these different topics, but in order to have time for discussion, I will just kind of skip over the details. I think that you understood the basic principle, what we are after, and we cannot do this alone. That's why we hope that many of you and others in other fields support such activities. And there are different responsibilities, a whole bunch of them for publishers, and then also for scientists and also for the funders. The Stockholm Declaration was summarized in a list of 34 statements, which you can find on the website, which is listed up there, seeit.org, Stockholm-Declaration. And we asked scientists to check the 34 items, and then you can agree to all of them. So if you want to make me happy tonight, you're going to go to that website, and then you can click, then I have 100 more. Right now we have over 500 already, and we have 34 organizations that have already signed. And you see, if you look at the numbers, we have roughly a 98% agreement to all of the 34 items. The only exception is, and I don't understand it, our demand to reduce the abundance of review articles. Some people objected to that, but I find it quite curious that 1/3 of all publications are reviews. That's pretty surprising, huh? 1/3 of all publications are reviews now. That means for 2 publications, you have already 1 review, statistically speaking, right? Or you review the same thing a million times, right? Okay, so what we are witnessing is the flood of junk in our literature. I invite you to co-sign the Stockholm Declaration, either as an institution or as an individual. These 2 choices you have. So to demonstrate that the scientific community is supportive of this. And I'd like to end my lecture with this nice picture from the library, the Königliche Biblioteket in Sweden, in Stockholm, which was under renovation while we had our conference. And when I took a little break walking through the park there, I saw this and I thought, that's a good picture because they are renovating the library. And in a way, we should also renovate or reform our scientific record so that in the future we can trust again when we read something and we are not misguided by misinformation and fake. And with this, I'd like to end my presentation and thank you for attending.